Could you describe her to us?
She looks youthful.
I feel like this is one of those situations where if I say he's 23, then he's actually going to be 16.
Hispanic, maybe not full, but part. Similar to me, actually.
Well, I mean, she's young, so probably has a lot of things to look forward to.
I would describe him as friendly.
She looks, happy. She doesn't look shy, but confident.
Anything she puts her mind to, she could achieve.
We actually have his story, if you could read that out loud to us.
Okay, Marcus. I grew up really close to my parents.
Adriana. I grew up with my brother and sister.
Amy. I remember watching the Olympics on TV when I was 5 and being totally in awe of the sprinters.
I was the middle child and easily the quietest.
I felt like no one ever saw me or cared.
Dad was too drunk to keep a job, and he never even saw me unless I was in his way.
Mom worked 2 jobs to make sure we had food for every meal, so she was never here to know when he would hit us.
One day when I went to the mall, like I like to do to be out of the house, a man came up to me and told me I was beautiful and asked me on a date.
On our first date, he drove me around in his car and said we could eat whatever I wanted.
Every time we were together, he bought me something new.
Tom really cared about me, and Tom really made me feel special.
I was in love with him.
After only going out for 3 weeks, Tom offered me a way out of my home, asked me to move in with him.
So when he asked me to have sex with him, I did.
He would put his hand over my face until I couldn't breathe.
Tom had friends over pretty regularly, and I could tell that some of his friends were into me.
So I kept my door locked and hoped that no one would bother me.
After a few nights of crashing there, he said that I still owed him for letting me stay at his place.
He said he had a friend who wanted to spend an hour with me.
He told me I might have to do some stuff, but not to worry about it. It's not a big deal.
When I didn't want to, he slapped me and said no one ever cared about me like he did.
But I didn't know what else to do because I needed a place to stay.
His friends forced themselves on me and took turns while he watched.
One by one, they'd come down to the basement, telling me how pretty I am.
When they're on top of me, I just close my eyes and pretend I'm running.
I'm exhausted and I don't know what to do.
My name is Adriana, I'm 16 years old.
My name is Marcus, I'm 14 years old.
My name is Amy, I'm 12 years old.
I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
And I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
And I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
That was very different than what I thought.
Especially because like being a girl and imagining like if that was me, like that's, I don't even know, I can't even imagine what that would be like.
She deserves to be a kid, just like what she is in this picture.
It being so close to home is something that makes me want to jump out of this chair.
I wouldn't think that Grand Rapids is a place where anything like this would ever happen.
Because you don't want it to happen to anybody, and you really don't want it to happen to people that live where you live.
Thank you for sharing her story with us. I'd like to show you something if you wouldn't mind taking her picture and following me to the gym.
Oh, wow.
I expected something certainly a lot smaller.
Bar graphs and numbers but these are actual people.
I don't know, in like my world, in my bubble or whatever, we don't talk about this. It's not something you think about.
You know, what we see is only on the surface.
I mean, looking at this, sex trafficking doesn't have any discrimination, that's for sure. Ages, genders, can affect anybody.
it hits you right in your heart, your gut, your stomach. It's like, wow. Now it's like I feel like I have this weight of responsibility to see how I can help.
Changes through greater awareness and making people realize that this does happen here and will continue to happen until we decide to make it stop.
Human trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar industry, responsible for the enslavement of an estimated 150 million people.
Thank you so much for coming
globally.
in. I'm Mary, by the way.
Mary tonight.
Sorry about that, Jackie. Okay.
It's a highly profitable industry to traffickers who've enslaved human beings because they can be sold repeatedly. While there isn't an official estimate of the total number of human trafficking victims in the United States, as it is a hidden crime, with few victims willing and able to come forward, it's considered one of the most heinous crimes on earth, and it's happening in every state in the United States, including Pennsylvania, and in fact, right here in York County. I know of 2 organizations locally who are tasked with providing support and services for survivors, the YWCA York and Sparrow Place, a newly founded nonprofit with the vision to provide a residential restoration program for survivors of domestic sex trafficking. Our speakers today include experts from the federal government and a representative from the YWCA of Greater Harrisburg, which recently received $1.3 million in federal grants for victims of human trafficking and sexual assault. According to law enforcement officials, it's believed that awareness is one of the best ways to combat this epidemic. Our panel of speakers will share information on different forms of trafficking, real cases here in York County, and what is being done to assist victims. Trish Danner is the Regional Outreach Specialist with the United States Department of Health and Human Services. Rhonda Hendrickson is VP of Programs in the Division of Residential and Violence Intervention and Prevention for the YWCA of Greater Harrisburg. Melissa Howley is a victim agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And Mary Tiernan is an attorney with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Fellow Rotarians and guests, please help me welcome our panel of speakers.
Thank you, Jackie. That was a great summary, so I can skip a couple slides. Thank you for having us here today to talk about this really important issue. As Jackie said, the more people are aware of the issue, the better we have a chance of stopping it. Here we go. So I'm going to go very fast so we can get to the other people. Human trafficking is a form of modern-day slavery in which traffickers use force, fraud, or coercion to control victims for the purpose of engaging in commercial sex acts or labor services against his or her will. Some quick facts. 1 in 7 children run away from home because they're sexually abused, and then they get trafficked. Half the kids that run away from home, within 24 hours, they're trafficked. That 14-year-old boy from Carlisle that ran away from home the other night after a fight with mom, let's hope and pray he's safe. We don't know. Talking about sending your kids to the mall like we used to do, go to the mall, hang out with your friends. I would never let my 13-year-old granddaughter go there by herself because there are predators everywhere. It's horrible. Sorry, I get tripped up about it. Anyway, our Region 3 task force, which I'm a member of, we cover Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, and the District of Columbia. We have members of our task force from the FBI, Office of Homeland Security, the EEOC, which you'll be hearing from later today. Our task force raise awareness, which is so important. We are a resource for people to use. We do panels. Last week we were up at State College with the Pennsylvania Office of Rural Health, and we had an all-day event. We had like 6 different panels. We had addressing the community response to human trafficking, the law enforcement response. We had Robert Schaaf, who was the first district attorney in Pennsylvania to prosecute human traffickers. And he talked about reviewing one of his victims' phones. And after she posted that she was available, in 1 hour she had 765 hits. So you think there's a demand? So let's stop the demand, right? Every 30 seconds, another person becomes a victim of human trafficking. The Human Trafficking Task Force, we talked to faith-based organizations, the medical community, chambers of commerce, Rotary clubs, healthcare organizations. The White House and the Secretary Azar have recently established a National Advisory Committee on Sex Trafficking of Children and Youth in the United States. I was in Maryland the other week, and I learned about criminal trafficking. I didn't know about it. In Baltimore, there's gangs, and they use 15, 16-year-old boys to sell drugs. These boys aren't using drugs, but they're forced to sell drugs. So their detention centers are actually developing screening questions. If you didn't sell these drugs, what would happen? Are you going to be hurt? Would your family be hurt? Never even thought about it. The opioid epidemic. Parents will have their children become addicted to heroin so that they can sell them for trafficking to support their drug addiction. If you're trafficked and you don't perform, you're skipped so you don't get your heroin. It's just amazing. That last bullet there, recently 60 individuals, 31 of which were doctors, 7 pharmacists, and 8 nurses were charged with trading opioid prescriptions for sex and cash. That was just in April of this year from the New York Times. These are Pennsylvania's human trafficking statistics. I think they're low, but 275 contacts were made to the tip line, and 630 human trafficking cases were reported in 2018. I'm sure it's much higher than that. Here in New York, or in Pennsylvania, are some headlines that I just Googled. I think you could have pages and pages of these slides, but I just Googled quickly. Pennsylvania charges Florida man in alleged human trafficking in massage parlors in Philadelphia Inquirer. Human trafficking happens right under our noses. York Daily Record. It's real human trafficking in Pennsylvania. At least one multi-million-dollar ring has been shut down in Lancaster County. That last one, apparently opioid addiction is one of the reasons why Pittsburgh has made it to the top of our list of U.S. cities for human trafficking in 2019. I wanted to share, since we have all these states, I'm able to go out and talk to people. In Delaware, I think, is a leader in what they're doing against human trafficking. And almost 90% of victims are seen by the medical community and not being recognized as being trafficked or identified. So Delaware passed a law that makes it, they have these screening questions that all hospital staff have to be aware of to be able to identify a person that might be trafficked. So they will ask, do you know where you are? Can you come and go as you please? If you work, do you have control over your earnings? And do you carry your own identification? They're working on a different set of questions for the juveniles. They also, I thought this was incredible, they have this intern project, the Delaware Department of Corrections, where they partnered with the University of Wilmington and had the interns go into the women's correction facility and talk to them about human trafficking. And then they interviewed. And out of 300 women, 65 are actual victims of human trafficking in prison. So they were actually working on the release of those women. So what can you do? Be aware. Know agencies in the area that you can work with and partner with. Know the human trafficking hotline. There's these cards on your way out that you can pick up and have in your wallet. Promote a donation drive, and oh my goodness, all those donations downstairs. Thank you. And on behalf of the Glory House, thank you. That is wonderful. What not to do not try to rescue the victim. Be aware of the person that they're with. A lot of times they won't talk for themselves. This other person will talk for them. They're quiet, they're shy. So just know, try to recognize it. But do call and report the trafficking hotline. So with that, I know it was really fast, I'm sorry, but I want to be able to hear from our experts here. So Rhonda, I think you're next.
Good afternoon. So I want to just first say thank you so much for the invitation to speak to you for a few minutes. My name is Rhonda Hendrickson. I'm with the YWCA in Greater Harrisburg, and I've been managing victim services programs for about 15 years. Since 2009, one of my specialties, my expertise, has really fallen around human trafficking, and I was part of helping form one of the first human trafficking response teams in the state of Pennsylvania. From there, the YWCA brought and filled a gap in services across central Pennsylvania. There really wasn't anybody responding specifically to human trafficking victims. Our network in the state of domestic violence and sexual assault centers, of which we are one, and your neighboring YWCA York is also one, were responding to trafficking victims. What we were able to do back in 2014 is seek a grant from the federal government, which I believe you referred to in the opening, that we've had now since 2014. That grant, we call that project Path 15, the Pennsylvania Alliance Against Trafficking in Humans Route 15 project. And through a collaborative network of 5 domestic violence, sexual assault service agencies, legal services and immigration services, as well as partnering with our friends at the FBI, who you'll hear from, ICE, and our state and local police, we are covering 8,400 square miles of territory up and down Route 15 in Pennsylvania. And across that territory, we're providing crisis intervention services and identification of victims. You know, that's our priority, is to be able to identify victims. And we do that by having standardized protocols about what to do when somebody sees red flags. I won't go into those today because that's about an hour-and-a-half training, and we provide that training free of charge. You can get a hold of us. We have brochures up here on the table. But we provide that training, and we want, you know, those boots on the ground to be aware of what's happening. You know, how many of you think trafficking happens near your home? Show of hands. Some? Okay. How many of you think there is a heroin or opioid problem in your neighborhood? More hands, great. How many of you have a hotel somewhere in your neighborhood or around your workplace? More hands going up? How about the internet? Who's got access to the internet? Okay, now I gotcha, right? How about a smartphone? Who brought their smartphone today? Yeah, okay. If you can say one of those, some of those, or any of those are yeses, I'm going to tell you that you have human trafficking in your neighborhood, near your home, near your workplace, and in your community. I know this because I see it every day from the victims who come and seek services from us. Now, so we cover 12 counties. 75% of our victims come from the Dauphin, Cumberland, and York County regions. And since we started this specific human trafficking project in 2014, we've served nearly 300 victims. And what's challenging is victims don't often identify themselves as a victim of human trafficking. Who's seen the movie Taken? Some of you? Anybody know what Liam Neeson has? Thank you. Yes, he does. He is some retired agent. He has a special set of skills, and his daughter gets kidnapped out of a hotel room or a relative, somebody's apartment over in, I don't know, it's Paris or France, and she's a young, white, innocent girl with clean hands. Meaning she did nothing wrong. She is not a substance abuse user. She was not putting her own self up on a Craigslist or a Backpage.com before it was shut down, trying to sell sex. She was completely innocent. Does that happen? Yes. Is that who we see? No, not usually. What we see are individuals who are very vulnerable, whether it's because their immigration status is in question, or perhaps they have a substance abuse problem, or perhaps they're just socially awkward child who's looking for a friend, or perhaps they're a victim of childhood sexual abuse or domestic violence in the home. About 85% of our victims identify histories of domestic violence and sexual assault. If you can match what I'm saying to any of the clients that you work with, people in your lives, consumers, clients, right, then you've probably seen cases of human trafficking. Again, because we don't have a lot of time, we're happy to come out to you and provide that training and talk to you about what you can do. What I'd also like to show you, I think Trish said, what can you do? People hear these stories, and we've got some real, really sad stories. We've also got some really good stories. But what you can do, you can become a mentor. We have a new prevention program that we started about a year ago, and it is aimed at preventing sex trafficking in children, and in children who are at risk of trafficking, which is every child. Every child. And what we aim to do is through a trauma-informed, evidence-based approach to mentoring, we build protective factors into children's lives. And you have the opportunity, whether it's you, a family member, maybe somebody in your workplace you want to take these back to, we need mentors to work with our program. We provide a ton of support and activities along with you developing that mentor-mentee relationship. So I'll leave it at that. I'm getting the stop sign. So thank you so much again for the invitation.
Hi everybody, my name is Melissa Howley and I'm a victim specialist with the FBI. I cover 37 counties in the state of Pennsylvania, one being York. We focus a lot on domestic minor sex trafficking and domestic trafficking of adults as well. The international trafficking victims are usually for Homeland Security, although we do sometimes have crossover and we work with them with labor relation type items as well. So I've been asked today to talk about what's happening here in York and how do we assist victims. Within the law enforcement community here, we do proactive trafficking operations, or victim recovery operations is what we're calling them. We recognize that nobody wakes up one day and says, I want to be a prostitute today. So we oftentimes look at the reasons behind, is this child a runaway? Was she a runaway in the past? Is there drug and alcohol abuse? Is she fleeing from an abusive situation? She's trying to get to a safe place. This trafficker provides her that safe place and then exploits her sexually for his own gain. So we do have a lot of that here because we have an extreme opioid crisis here, if we weren't all aware. Also meth, by the way, is coming back into favor, so that's another way for control. When we talk about human trafficking, some of the elements we have to prove in a case and through legal channels is force, fraud, and coercion. One of the big ways that it happens here is through drug coercion. And lots of times these drug dealers, well, not just here but everywhere, the drug dealers start off as drug dealing. And then that becomes very risky because we have a lot of undercovers out on the streets, we have a lot of informants out on the streets, a lot of people looking at drugs. We have one person in York County looking at trafficking. So the drug dealers are now all learning to become traffickers instead of drug dealers. It's safer for them. The people who are going to get arrested, not them, it's going to be the girls in the hotel rooms or on the out calls to undercover. So they're kind of changing how they operate and And again, as somebody had alluded to, being able to sell the product, which would be the victim in this situation, multiple times, versus when you're selling drugs, you sell, your brick of heroin and that's it. You've got to go re-up. When you go to re-up for your drugs, then that means that you're putting yourself in more harm's way of getting caught by an undercover, getting a traffic stop, that kind of thing, to be able to get caught up by the police. If they like to keep the traffickers like to keep their hands out of it as many levels as they possibly can. So trafficking is now a safer and, in fact, a more lucrative business around here. They do also have built-in clientele, built-in victims, because they turn out the users of their drugs. These girls have been going to them many times, for many years, for drugs. Around here, if you have clean heroin, where people are not overdosing on it, then you're going to be a top heroin supplier around here, because people aren't dying on your stuff. So you're going to have more people purchasing heroin from you. Of course, there are some females, involved with it, and then the drug dealer then turns into, oh, you want my heroin? Okay, well, you've got to go make me some money. And a bundle of heroin costs about $60, $80, but the trafficker is going to have you make $1,000 for that same amount of heroin. And if you want to keep getting your clean heroin, then you're going to make that money so that you don't die of an overdose. And you're going to keep coming back to him. And that's kind of how it works here in this area. So when we assist victims, when we do our proactive operations, basically what we do are just recovery operations. We're looking to help people. We're not looking to arrest victims, because under Act 105, which is a Pennsylvania state law enacted in 2014, victims should not be charged with prostitution or any related offenses if they're being trafficked during the commissions of those crimes. So we are always looking for victims and being able to provide this, or doing assessments and providing services to what they might need. So we partner here with the YWCA Access York for the shelter. We have, I have 100 contacts at all the different drug and alcohol centers around here. Still Waters is a facility down in Hanover who also is taking trafficking victims now as well. In this area, we have Covenant House, actually, which is a drop-in center as well for teens and young adults. They take homeless and trafficked youth here in New York up to the age of 22. So we do have a county human trafficking task force, which is led by the Access York, and on that task force we have coroner's office, law enforcement, we have victim services, we have child advocacy center, the DA's office. So we have the hospital, we have safe nurses involved with it. There's a whole county protocol and hospital protocol that we follow as well when we do receive a trafficking victim in any way, whether it's through a recovery operation or through the hospital or however. So just to ensure that these victims are getting the appropriate services and they're not just being kicked out on the street to go back to the trafficker, because that is oftentimes what happens. So that's kind of the long and short of it here for direct victim services, how it works, what it looks like here in York County, and I'll be passing on to our next.
Hello everyone. Thank you for the privilege of being here today. I'm Mary Tiernan with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC. We're an independent federal agency that enforces the laws against discrimination in the workplace. So these are laws that protect against discrimination or harassment because of race, sex, religion, national origin, color, disability, age if you're 40 or older. I'm actually not going to do the slides because I don't want to go over my 4 minutes. So how do our laws relate to trafficking? Well, brilliant people in our agency recognize that the laws that we already enforce against discrimination, harassment, could also help give compensation and redress to victims of labor trafficking. For most of our laws, if the employer has 15 or more employees, they have to follow the federal laws against discrimination, against harassment. For the age law, the employer has to have 20 or more employees to be subject to that law. Under Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, if they have 4 or more, they have to follow the state laws against discrimination. So we've had various cases with larger employers, subject to these laws, where the type of treatment they subjected the employees to deals with labor trafficking. For example, less pay, giving different job duties, more difficult tasks, unrelated tasks, unauthorized work, not giving the benefit of what they promised people when they offered them jobs. Some of the cases that we had with labor trafficking victims, they were people who were enticed to come to this country with visas to work in particular jobs, but then weren't given the jobs that were promised or were paid far less, some cases less than minimum wage, because of their national origin. Harassment is another one. Sometimes they've been offered housing, but then the problem is the housing is deplorable. A lot of their pay would be taken to go for the housing. They would have threats of either being deported or arrested if they left the confined housing. Not given proper food in some of the cases, or not having utilities or water. An example of one of these cases is Shelton and the EEOC versus John Pickle, where 52 skilled labor workers from India came to work in various skilled positions, welders, fitters, electricians, engineers. They had visas to work in these positions, but then they were being paid less than minimum wage, in some cases $1 an hour, to maybe $3 an hour. They were restrained in substandard living conditions, we alleged, passports confiscated. There was evidence that, differences in the wages, these living conditions, the terms of the employment, and harassment because of their national origin. And the case wound up resolving for $1.3 million for these victims of labor trafficking, of this forms of discrimination, and also equitable relief to address what had happened. A similar case against Trans-Bay Steel out of one of our offices in California. Welders were brought over on work visas from Thailand, but again, held against their will, passports confiscated, we alleged, movement restricted, forced to work 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, in cramped apartments without water, utilities. Some of them escaped and were able to seek help and assistance at a Thai temple, and individuals brought the cases to our attention. Another case, we might not think of this as a trafficking victim, but individuals with intellectual disabilities. Did anybody read the article in the New York Times, The Boys in the Bunkhouse? And later, the author expanded it into a book. It was based on her case, EEOC versus Hill Country Farms, doing business as Henry Turkey Services. So there were a group of individuals with intellectual disabilities who were working in eviscerating turkeys, very grueling labor in and of itself. But we allege that they were subjected to abusive and verbal and physical harassment, harsh punishments if supervisors felt that they weren't doing the job as they wanted, freedom restricted, deplorable working conditions, testimony about cockroaches and mice, and I believe one of the fire marshals talking about how substandard it was and a fire hazard. They've been subjected to these treatments and deplorable working conditions for years and years. Wound up with a jury award of $240 million. Now, it was later reduced because there are caps on the amount of compensatory and punitive damages we can get, tied into the size of the workforce or the employer. But so I think a powerful testament to how seriously the jury took it and how they wanted to correct what these gentlemen had been subjected to for a long period of time. There are timeframes to file charges with the EEOC. Now, I think, as you heard from everyone else, if you came across a case of labor trafficking, the most important things are getting the person to safety, whether it's calling 911. I saw, Melissa, that you had the 1-800-FBI. Could that be a number to call as well, 1-800-FBI? Trish, could you go back to the last slide of Trish's with the 888 number? Thank you. I'm going to ask you to do what I've heard from Trish in other settings. Put the 888 number in your cell phone, just right now, because you're getting this knowledge and we know to think about this and, there are the resources here, but what if you saw somebody being trafficked? Would you think of I know there's a hotline number, let me try to Google it real fast. If you have that in your contacts, or the 1-800-FBI, 888-3737-88, 888, yeah. 3 8s, 37, 37, and 3 8s. Yeah. But you might not have the cars with you, you heard me now. I know it's the 88 number, I knew it was the 373, but I know myself, if I were in the middle of seeing this, I might not get the number right away. So if you just add it to your contact list, that could be an easy way, proactive, to do about this. When I talk about these laws, Jackie was kind enough to mention I'm an attorney. I haven't been practicing as an attorney at EEOC for years. I've had the opportunity to come and talk to people because we feel it's very important for employers to know about their responsibilities to follow our laws, and we have a lot of information at eeoc.gov, or also in your capacities as employees. You have rights against discrimination and harassment, and that's at eeoc.gov. And if you go on our website and just plug in human trafficking, you can see more about some of these cases and the resources. We also have a tie-in to the 888 number. And thank you for coming here. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with all of you, and for going forward that we can all be advocates to try to end these deplorable forms of modern-day slavery. Thank you.
Unfortunately, we're running a little bit behind schedule and we don't have time for questions today, but hopefully our panelists can stick around for a couple minutes to answer any questions that you might have. Let's give them one more round of applause.